TF2 is a game filled to the brim with iconography that a lot of other games would kill to have even a fraction of. It's a game that's had a lot of staying power, and a certain part of that comes down to the charming absurdity of some of its weapon concepts. Like, it's always fun to tell your friends who don't know much about the game that you can run around beating someone to death with a raw fish. And it's just as fun to tell them that the big minigun dude can equip a ham and bologna sandwich that's also easily the best item in its slot. And right up there next to the sandwich, albeit much more potentially off-putting than pretty much any weapon in the game, is the sniper's iconic Jarate. What I'm going to controversially say is Sniper's best weapon. And I know this statement is controversial because Sniper can do this, and this. Oh wait, not that one. Maybe a bit of this. How about some of this? Oh wait, that's a Huntsman clip. Never mind, that's apparently completely different, I guess. So saying that the funny jar of pee is stronger than the hit scan insta-kill from any Ranginator, or the projectile insta-kill from any Ranginator, is going to be contentious. And I know I'm going to have to explain myself to back that claim up. But in order for me to do that, we need to talk about some game design fundamentals. Typically in a balanced game, you balance the impact of a weapon or ability based on its cost. The higher the impact, the higher the cost, and vice versa. An item with high impact but low cost is going to be typically very easy to use and almost certainly overpowered, whereas one with low impact but high cost will rarely ever be worth using over something more consistently powerful. Now there's four main costs I'd like to go over. Obviously, if you're a game designer, you're going to find a lot more costs, but these are the main ones I'll be referencing in regards to TF2. The first cost, of course, is skill, or what amounts to long-term effort. If something takes a lot of practice to get right, then players who do get it right should be rewarded for it with higher impact. Headshots, air blast, rocket jumping, and double donks are all great examples of this. The next cost factor is risk. Are you putting yourself at risk in order to complete your task? If you are, then you should be rewarded accordingly. Getting a meat shot as scout, going in for a backstab, going for a market gardener kill, and even WM1 are all high risk plays with potentially great rewards. The third cost is one that is very common in a lot of games and genres: immediate time investment. This usually comes in the form of cooldowns, and TF2 is no exception to that. This can also be something like building a sentry from level 1 to level 3, or making the choice that this time investment isn't worth it or unnecessary, and going for the less impactful mini-sentry. It can also be something like building an uber charge as medic, or trading your secondary as soldier for a banner that takes time, skill, and a bit of risk to charge, for something that can be the difference maker in whether or not you win a game. The final cost is resource management. This one usually overlaps with time investment since cooldowns are usually single-use resources, but this also applies to many factors like health for things like rocket jumping, ammo for weapons with lower ammo counts like the Huntsman, metal for engineers, and cloak for spies. There's plenty of overlap in all of these examples. It's easy to say that going for a headshot as sniper is entirely free of risk, and maybe on sun maps it kind of is, but your lack of mobility and tunnel vision while scoped in make you vulnerable if you stay scoped in for too long. And charging up a headshot on a higher health target is a small but significant time investment when staying scoped in is a prominent weakness. Meat shots, certain backstabs, and market gardeners all take a great deal of skill and practice to pull off consistently on top of their risk factor. And building a sentry to level 3 doesn't just take time, it takes resources in the form of metal, your passive metal and the metal around the map, and even a degree of risk in terms of being so close to something the enemy wants destroyed, and for being preoccupied, which leaves you vulnerable to an ambush, making up for the high impact a single sentry can have on a match. Obviously, there's plenty of badly designed examples of this in the game. The gas passer is a notorious example, taking far too much time, far too much risk if you want to bypass that time investment, and being a one use per charge resource on top of this, all for an impact that is so laughable enemies don't even care about being coated with it. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you have something like the Wrangler, which doesn't even take all that much skill to use thanks to the laser aim assisting you, only has a time investment cost when it's no longer useful to you anyway, and the only resource it costs you is your pistol. The only real cost with the Wrangler is one of slight risk, since you're much more tunnel visioned and therefore vulnerable to spies, who can much more easily stab and sap your nest. The impact, meanwhile, is making your sentry, one of the strongest area denial tools in the game, now the bulkiest thing in the game outside of maybe a vaccinator pocketed Fists of Steel heavy. except while retaining the ability to shoot people. Now, what does all this nonsense have to do with the Jarate? Well, put simply, the Jarate falls into the high-impact, low-cost Wrangler category, and not all that many weapons in the game can say the same thing. There's way more weapons in the low-impact, high-cost category, which is certainly great for my career as a YouTuber, but that's besides the point. Jarate is a very powerful tool. Like, understatedly powerful. When it impacts a surface or player, it has a splash radius of 200 hammer units. To put it in perspective, rockets and stickies have a splash radius of 146 hammer units. That's pretty damn big. It's also pretty damn forgiving. Kinda like how you can visibly miss someone with the Huntsman, but still plant an arrow in their forehead, but that's apparently okay because it's not hit scan. I've seen so many situations where I think, okay, there's no way my Jarate actually hit that person, right? But then it did. Oh, like that. That's, would have been... Ow! That was... Did you see how many people that hit? That was nowhere near the splash. Like, people were halfway up the stairs. My fucking Jarate hit, like, the bottom of the ramp there. Good God, this weapon is busted. I have to make this video now. But in the interest of complete fairness, there have been just as many times where I thought, well, this will be the easiest thing in the world to hit, only for my urine to evaporate into thin air. I guess certain maps are particularly arid. Jarate walks this paradoxical line of being one of the most, if not potentially the most forgiving weapon in the game, and also being incredibly finicky. And maybe this finicky aspect is what causes so many people to underestimate its utility. Enemies coated in Jarate will take mini-crit damage from all applicable sources for 10 full seconds, which is reduced to potentially 5 seconds if they're being healed by a source like medics, dispensers, or payload cards, or if they're an invisible spy. With a recharge timer of 20, count 'em 20 seconds, this means that by the time the effect has worn off on anyone still alive, your Jarate is already halfway done recharging. That recharge timer can be reduced by a further 4 seconds if you happen to extinguish a burning teammate, and reduced by 1 second per headshot if you get headshots with the Sydney Sleeper, or eliminated entirely if you're next to a resupply cabinet. Don't worry, it's not like a lot of highly effective sniping positions are right next to the resupply cabinet anyway. I'm sure this isn't completely fucking busted. Enemies coated in Jarate can also remove the effects on maps with water by completely submerging themselves, or if they come under the effects of a stock uber charge. Powers are able to reflect the Jarate and cover the sniper who threw it. It can be deleted by the engineer's short circuit, nullified entirely by a soldier's battalion's backup charge, or a Demo Knight's charge can get rid of it. Those are pretty much Jarate's only weaknesses, and they're either very situational or else have a higher cost than Jarate does. So basically, what this means is you get what is the equivalent of a fucking buff banner charge against the enemy team every 20 seconds or less. This is pretty huge for a multitude of reasons, one of which is that it severely hampers one of Sniper's best counters, superior team coordination. See, if you're playing Sniper and you see a fuckload of people heading your way, your thought process will look something like this. 1. Oh shit. 2. Run. But Jarate adds a third step to that thought process. 1. Oh shit. 2. Wait, hold on.
Bombs away!
3. Okay, now run. And then you just let your teammates clean up for you even if they were previously at a disadvantage. Now, I get it. Sniper is listed as a support class, and this is him supporting his team. I just think that for an effect this potentially game-changing and, more importantly, weakness-eliminating, a sniper should have to do more than wait twice the length of the effect's duration or run back to resupply. Speaking of resupply, if that offensive push happens to be taking place right outside your spawn, which happens to be the case in most game modes outside of King of the Hill, then the bullshit you can pull off with the resupply cabinet is pretty heinous. On the subject of eliminating weaknesses, this weapon is far more detrimental to a spy's existence than the Razorback has ever been. With such a generous splash radius, it's not uncommon to catch a spy by complete mistake. As if spies don't have it hard enough, man. And spies are meant to be a counter to Sniper, which they usually do a pretty good job at, so it's another one of Sniper's weaknesses being neutered just because he pissed in a jar. And of course, it's instrumental in one of the most infuriating and imbalanced combos in the entire game, which you'll probably be using to finish off that very same spy you caught out. Jarate and the Bushwhacker. So I've seen a lot of people, myself included, give the Bushwhacker a lot of shit because of its role in this combo. But the Bushwhacker is just what deals the killing blow. If it wasn't for Jarate being so generous and so disposable, no one would really care. I mean, hey, look at the Cleaner's Carbine. It does the exact same thing by giving you several seconds of guaranteed mini-crits with your Bushwhacker, but the big difference is there's a legitimate cost in the form of skill, time, and resource investment to deal 100 damage with a dogshit SMG. The only downside to using Jarate for the express purpose of fucking over spies or any flanker who manages to get too close to you is that you aren't single-handedly stopping an entire coordinated push. But even then, as long as the enemy team doesn't attack in that 20-second window they now have while your Jarate is recharging, you'll be fine. Hell, on certain maps, 20 seconds is how long it'll take for that spy or flanker to respawn and make their way back to you even with a teleporter. Have you noticed, by the way, that this is yet another one of Sniper's weaknesses, that being general close-range combat, being completely eliminated by the existence of Jarate? This all wraps us back around to the entire beginning of this video. When we look at Jarate's impact versus its costs, it's a complete mess. There's little to no skill involved. With one of the highest splash radii in the game, it's incredibly easy to ruin any significant push, or to catch out a spy, or deter any flanker from getting too close to your Bushwhacker without even trying. The only skill involved is accounting for the arc, and you'll get plenty of chances to get some practice in there with only a short 20-second recharge timer. There's basically no risk involved. The only time there is any risk is in those close-range situations, and even then, all you have to do is close that gap while they try to do the same on a target that is traditionally at his weakest in close quarters combat. And even if they back away from you, all they're doing is putting themselves at risk of your long-range primary. It's like fighting a Marauder, but 1,000 times worse, because a Marauder's axe throws and shotgun shots don't both do insta-kill damage. Part of the lack of risk comes down to Sniper's and Jarate's core design. He's not really meant to capitalize on it himself unless he uses the Bushwhacker or sometimes the Huntsman, leaving the job to his team, leaving him in relative safety. Compare this to the Mad Milk, which is very similar, but since the Scout can benefit from the Mad Milk himself, there's far more incentive to get in there and take some risks, bolstered further by the Scout's high-risk, high-reward style of gameplay. And hell, even if you die in those higher risk situations, that flanker or spy who tried to kill you is still probably screwed unless the fight lasted longer than 10 seconds, since now he has to survive the rest of your team while covered in piss. This makes Jarate highly effective as a last-ditch middle finger against whoever is attacking you in a fight you know you can't win. The time investment is not nearly enough when compared to contemporaries like the Buff Banner, which takes 600 damage to charge up fully, more than you can get out of a single rocket launcher's clip even with the direct hit at point-blank range. Even at its most optimal, the Buff Banner will take a while to charge, and closing the gap to charge it quickly puts yourself at greater risk of not getting a chance to use it at all, since unlike Jarate, you don't start off with a full Buff Banner charge as soon as you spawn. Can you even fucking imagine if the Buff Banner just auto-charged every 20 seconds? Jesus fucking Christ. And it's clear they were trying to make Jarate a more precious resource. But because the time investment is so minimal, especially on a more sedentary class like Sniper, who's typically going to be hanging out at the backline anyway, it just doesn't have that effect. Jarate is incredibly disposable, which does kind of make sense considering it is human waste after all, but it doesn't work for balance at all. Ultimately, Jarate is Sniper's strongest weapon not just because it can make far more of an impact than single target elimination can in the most game-changing moments of a match, and not just because it's incredibly disposable, but because while something like this, against a player actually worth killing who actually knows how to fight a Sniper, is usually reserved for players with hundreds of hours put into the class, this can be accomplished by anyone picking up the item for the first time. Not to mention, the counterplay is minimal to non-existent for certain classes. Pyro can air blast it, Engie can short circuit it, Demo Man can charge away, and the medic can pop an Uber, but all of these have far more cost than the Jarate itself unless the engineer is on a payload cart. Far less options for countering the Jarate exist than can be said for the Sniper rifles. I'm sure some absolute loser with way too much time on his hands could easily make a video talking about all the ways to completely shut down and counter a Sniper so that people can finally shut the fuck up about how the class has no counterplay. Anyways, with all of this said, Why do not all that many people care about Jarate being so, let's be fucking real, overpowered? I mean, loads of people use it, obviously, even though I feel like I mostly see snipers these days wearing either the Danger Shield or Razorback, which depresses me. But the sheer impact it has on the game is rarely felt or criticized by those outside of competitive communities. And I think it's for a couple of very simple reasons. One, a lot of snipers just aren't using it as efficiently as they could be. Most snipers use Jarate very selfishly, either as a close range get out of jail free card with the Bushwhacker, a means of tracking an annoying spy, or to extinguish themselves from the afterburn of a well-aimed flare or even a cowmangler shot. Or a brainlessly spammed flare, but at that point the sniper's more likely to switch to the Danger Shield. This is pretty much the least effective way to use Jarate. It's as good as not using it the majority of the time, and a lot of potential crowd control moments are wasted on the backline scoped in, hoping someone walks into your crosshairs. Multitasking and switching between normal single target elimination sniper duties and supporting your team in larger fights just doesn't seem to compute for the vast majority of snipers I've seen use this item. And the second reason is, it's often difficult or useless for the sniper to take advantage of their own Jarate in the situations where it's most effective in. In those crowd control situations, there's not much you can do against sodden enemies unless you want to run in screaming with your Bushwhacker or pop the enemies for 68 damage no-scopes. The only real exception to this is if you're using the Huntsman. Your rifle headshots are exactly the same as they normally are, meaning you're leaving it entirely up to your team to take advantage of your Jarate, which is the essence of support, but it's not quite as satisfying on the scoreboard. Getting a bunch of assists on a large group feels a lot less nutty than going on a one-man army killing streak. Lack of proper team coordination on your end can also make using Jarate feel kind of pointless, but then it can also make playing sniper feel kind of pointless. It's best to use in situations where your team is already in the process of attacking a group or potentially even just a high-value target, because you know there's no possible chance for them to fuck it all up. On this topic, Jarate is excellent at forcing retreats since no sane player is going to want to engage in a fight on such blatantly unequal terms, but for as impactful as forcing someone to retreat is, it doesn't show up on the kill feed, so I guess people just don't really care. So ultimately, Jarate's lack of abuse comes primarily from people either refusing to abuse it out of a selfish sense of self-preservation, or from declining to abuse it in favor of using their primary tools, even when multitasking would be far more efficient. I'm honestly not sure if there's another case in the game quite like this. Most of the time, when an option is easily the best, or the meta as it's often called, it's pushed to its absolute limits in terms of use and abuse. But I guess when you play the edgy lone wolf on the backlines, coordinating with and supporting your team doesn't really fit the MO. If I were to change the Jarate in any way, I'd say give it the gas passer treatment. That's not to say I'd make it suck or anything, just make it so it can't be refilled from resupply, you don't get to start off with from spawning, and it recharges through more time than 20 seconds as well as damage dealt. Honestly, I think when Valve was making the gas passer, they really meant to put this total conversion of the traditional jar weapon stats onto the Jarate and Mad Milk, but either forgot to do that or else just thought they'd use the gas passer as a test run to see how well it went. The problem with the gas passer's design is that its impact doesn't justify all the bullshit. It could have a 5-second recharge and that wouldn't justify it. You can fucking throw it through walls and that still doesn't justify it. With Jarate, yeah, that's justified. That's a significant enough time and resource cost that it would make Jarate far more balanced, even with something like the Bushwhacker. Instantly, every cost goes up if this change is applied to Jarate. Recently, I've started up a server that tests rebalances of several weapons, and the Jarate is among them. It now takes 40 seconds, or 5 kills, to recharge, and it can't be refilled by the resupply cabinet anymore. And that's it, and it's way more balanced. Overall, how you use Jarate is still basically the same, and this method of balancing is much more appropriate for competitive play while still being fun to use in casual, since there's so many more heads to shoot at, letting you do lots of damage to charge it up just about as quickly. So if you want to charge it up quickly, it takes a substantial skill investment, and otherwise it's a much more substantial time and resource investment. But in the end, it's just a more balanced version of Sniper's best weapon, and it's still arguably his best secondary. It's still the same funny and iconic mason jar full of piss we all know and love, it's just a lot less brainless and has a lot more cost. And let's be real, if the man is pissing every 20 seconds, then that jar should be red instead of yellow. It's for his benefit more than ours.
So much bloody piss!